Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm moderating the second YouTube session of the 10th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Yes, it's the 10th anniversary of Read for Pixels. And today's YouTube session is also our 16th Read for Pixels live stream author panel since we started hosting panels in 2018. And the Pixel Project created these multi-author panel sessions to be an accessible resource for writers interested in writing about female characters and approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy. And we have a really interesting topic for today's panel. It's a retrospective topic. It's Imagining Better Worlds, a 10-year retrospective on sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in speculative fiction. And here to participate in the discussion are three award-winning, best-selling speculative fiction authors who have written some of the best English language fantasy in the world for the past decade or more. So next to me is Jim C. Hines. Jim is the author of the Magic X Libris series and the Princess series of fairy tale retellings, the humorous Goblin Quest trilogy, and the Fable Legends tie-in Blood of Heroes. He also won the 2012 Hugo Award for Best Fan Writer. His latest novel is Terminal Peace, which is book 3 in the humorous science fiction genesis of the post-apocalypse trilogy. He lives in mid-Michigan with his family. And right below me on screen is Mary Robinette Kowal. And Mary Robinette is the author of The Spare Man, Ghost Talkers, the Glamorous History series, and the Lady Astronaut universe. She is part of the award-winning podcast Writing Excuses and a 4-time Hugo Award winner. Her short fiction appears in Uncanny, Tor.com, and Asimov's. Mary Robinette, a professional puppeteer, lives in Nashville, Tennessee. And next to Mary Robinette is Martha Wells. And Martha is the author of the New York Times best-selling series, The Murderbot Diaries. And The Murderbot Diaries has won Nebula Awards, Hugo Awards, Locus Awards, and an American Library Association / YALSA Alex Award. Her work also includes the books of the Raksura series, I can't pronounce this.
Ilrian?
Yeah, Ilren, sorry everyone, the Ilren series and several other fantasy novels, most recently Witch King, and y'all got to read Witch King. It's really awesome. So aside from joining today's panel, Jim, Mary, and Martha have donated some super exclusive goodies to the stash of author treats we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels 10th anniversary fundraising page. And we have good news and bad news. So I'm just going to tell everyone what the goodies are. So Jim has is offering the full Janitors of the Post-Apocalypse book series together with a bookmark. And that has all been snapped up. That bundle has been snapped up by J91. And thank you so much, J9. We have no idea if J9 is. Anyway,
J9 is awesome, obviously.
J9 is awesome. So thank you so much, J9, for your donation. Now, Martha had donated 4 books. One signed and personalized first edition hardcover of Witch King, which I say everyone must go read it. 2 signed and personalized hardcover editions of Fugitive Telemetry, which is the 6th book, I think, in the Murderbot Diaries. And 1 signed Subterranean Press edition of the Murderbot Diaries. And all 4 books have been taken. 3 have been taken by anonymous donors, and 1 has been taken by Stephen Boucher. And we would like to thank all 4 donors. Thank you so much for your generous donations, especially for the Murderbot Diaries. That raised a cool $850.
Yay.
Yay. And Mary Robinette has 2 really, really cool bundles. Now, the first one is a coaching and cocktail bundle, which is really unusual because it includes the following: one 30-minute Zoom call with Mary Robinette for a private unlocking session in which she will help you get unstuck from a single issue or question in your story or writing process. And that's really valuable for a lot of writers. And one custom cocktail recipe designed for you just by Mary Robinette, which she will email to you before the Zoom call. And I think this is linked to one of your books, right, Mary Robinette?
In The Spearman, every chapter begins with a cocktail recipe. And just to be clear, in my opinion, cocktail does not mean it has to have alcohol in it. So we are very, whatever it is that you are interested in consuming, I can help you with that flavor palette.
Okay. And the second bundle is a bundle that's gone. It's the Tuckerization and Cowl bundle. And that bundle includes one opportunity to name a minor character in one of Mary Robinette's upcoming books, and one wool cowl hand knitted by Mary Robinette herself. And that's Zoom, that's gone. And it's taken by an anonymous donor, whom we can tell you, Mary Robinette is a longtime donor, as a longtime supporter of Read for Pixels, who is very excited, very, very excited about it.
Can't wait to murder. I mean, treat them so kindly in the novel.
Yeah, we'll connect you with the donor soon. So our fundraiser has just kicked off, and we've raised $2,400. That's 24% of the way to the 10K goal that we've set. So $10,000 for our 10th anniversary. And please, everyone, give generously before the fundraiser ends in October 2023. And all funds go towards keeping our anti-violence against women work alive and kicking. Now, before we begin the discussion session, today's panel session, please remember that if you are in the audience, and you will be able to ask Jim, Mary Robinette, and Martha questions as well. But just make sure you're logged into YouTube so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Anusha Kandasivam, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Jim, Mary, and Martha to answer. So if everyone's ready, we shall begin. Now, let's start with a little intro. Now, speculative fiction, including science fiction, fantasy, and horror, has long been packed with stories that rife with themes and tropes related to sexism, misogyny, and violence against women. These include many of the books that we consider classics and many of the most popular subgenres, from epic fantasies with token women to grimdark bestsellers where rape is used as a gratuitous torture porn, to horror where women are often portrayed as monsters. So when the Pixel Project created the Read for Pixels campaign as part of our work to end violence against women, we did so because we recognize that storytelling, and storytellers, including authors, in pop culture, play a key role in awareness raising when it comes to difficult social issues such as violence against women. However, we were, and still are, keenly aware that popular genre fiction, including speculative fiction, reflects the sexism, misogyny, and violence against women across society, and in many cases play a role in perpetrating these issues by normalizing such beliefs. So in honor of the 10th anniversary of the Read for Pixels campaign, today's panel will be discussing how fantasy and science fiction and horror has progressed and changed over the past decade with regards to sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in the genre stories and books, as well as what the speculative fiction community, including authors, readers, publishers, and fandoms, can do about it. So with all this in mind, let's get the discussion started. So all three of you have been writing speculative fiction for more than a decade. And I think some of you have been writing it for 2 decades. Yeah, 2 decades. And all of your books and stories have feminist sensibilities and are excellent examples of how to write compelling and complex female characters in a genre that hasn't always been kind to women and girls. So do y'all think that there have been any changes, or indeed any change at all, in the way speculative fiction novels and stories have handled sexism, misogyny, and violence against women over the past 10 years. And let's start with Mary Robinette.
I do, actually. One of the biggest differences is that with social media, it's much easier to point out that there is a problem. But more specifically, I think one of the biggest changes over the past 10 years is who is talking about the books has shifted, which means that the books that were always there, that were being written by women for women, that had positive role models, are often getting lifted up and into public view in ways that previously had been shut out to them. And I'm also seeing, I mean, there are other things, but that's one of the things I'm aware of, and I'm certain that my happy panelists will say other things.
Yeah, Martha?
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the good things social media has done, particularly something like Twitter, was allowing people to read all these conversations that people were having about these issues. And it was a way to kind of educate yourself about all these issues without having to be actually part of the conversation. You can just watch people who are saying really smart things and take it in. And that is one of the best things I think about social media when it works the way it's supposed to. So I think that's really informed a lot of writing. I see even I see so many people whose writing has shifted over those time as they become more aware of those issues. And it is a hard thing. It's like when I can look at my earlier books and see how, that internalized misogyny affected me and how I've had to kind of work at it over the years to make female characters more prominent and just not obviously default to all the extra being male, So yeah, I think it has changed for the better.
Yeah. So Jim?
Yeah, what they said. I think there's been some change. I think obviously we've still got a ways to go. We're not done yet. I feel like there's less acceptance of the really blatant sexism and violence against women. And I say that, and my brain immediately goes to Game of Thrones, which came out within the last decade and had a lot. But Game of Thrones also led to a lot of discussion, a lot of pushback, a lot of what Mary Robinette and Martha were talking about, with people on social media saying, this is getting really old. We're really tired of rape being a plot device, of being just a way to motivate women, or even worse, a way to motivate the men. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think we're making progress. And I don't really imagine a movie like Barbie could have been made 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas now, there's pushback, there's arguing, but did I see it had knocked out Harry Potter as the studio's top earner?
Wow.
So
yeah.
That's a change.
Yeah.
It's
even something like Wheel of Time has a very different affect to is very different from Game of Thrones, and it was very popular too, and it's they're doing in their season now, so that's kind of really encouraging.
Yeah. So going from what Jim said, and we just make an observation before we go. I would just like to make an observation before we go on to the next question, which is, ever since Mary Shelley, whom many people call the mother of science fiction, put pen to paper to bring us Frankenstein, speculative fiction authors and creators have used stories and storytelling for tackling important social issues. However, and this is what I've observed personally, authors and creators have used stories and storytelling for tackling everything from racism to fascism in classics such as The Twilight Zone. But it seems that the portrayal of women has continued to be problematic in many spaces of speculative fiction, and issues such as sexism, misogyny, and violence against women continue to be treated as convenient shortcut tropes by many authors and creators. And as Jim said, Jim talked about Game of Thrones. It has been violence against women has been one of the mainstays of pop culture for years, and it draws huge audiences still. And screen adaptations of series like Game of Thrones have been criticized as contributing to a further normalization of extreme violence against women as entertainment over the past decade or so. So people are saying, like Jim said, people are saying, "Oh, we're getting tired of this and stuff." But also at the same time, my observation is some people have been getting more and more inured to it. So the question is, do you think there has been any improvements on this front in the last 10 years? With the Me Too movement kicking off a lot of discussion about these issues, as well as exposing some big name male authors as misogynists and abusers. So back to Mary Robinette.
So I actually, my feeling on this is that science fiction and fantasy is a microcosm of a larger systemic problem. And that we actually tend to be about 10 years ahead of the curve on what's happening. So some of the things that make it look like we have more misogyny happening in our fiction is that people are talking about it. Whereas when you're reading some contemporary fiction, people don't talk about it at all. And one of the easiest places to point at where we are ahead of the curve is the fact that 10 years ago, when you were talking about women in science fiction, it was entirely a binary. And now gender is in science fiction and fantasy, we see a lot of the gender umbrella and people existing along a continuum and moving back and forth in kind of this whole beautiful spectrum. And that's something that people in mainstream are catching up on. So I hear what you're saying, but Game of Thrones is not a young book. Mm-hmm. And it is being produced by mainstream. But when you look at the things that are coming out from our field that have not yet hit mainstream, they are way more progressive. And that's always been the case. Ursula Le Guin, Nancy Kress, they were all writing things were way ahead of the curve. Even, I would argue, and this is, I'm going to rile some feathers, I would even argue that Heinlein was ahead of the curve. Like when you look at Stranger in a Strange Land, all of the women in that are career women who are not interested in having babies. And who are open and accepting of their sexuality at a time when that was not acceptable. Would that have been written this? Would that fly now? That book? No, but it was ahead of the curve. And so I think that when you're looking at science fiction and fantasy, that we tend to be ahead of the curve. Like Murderbot, you have a non-gendered protagonist there, and that's something that mainstream, like someday they'll get caught up.
Yeah.
Yes. Martha?
I actually did a talk about this at WisCon this past year about specifically looking at science fiction fantasy media and how just the changes since 2009 as opposed to the 2019 was kind of a banner year for those kind of things, and looking at things like how in the show Legends of Tomorrow we have bisexual main characters having relationships and snuggling and kissing and on TV, and how impossible that seemed in science fiction and fantasy shows in 2009. Like Stargate Atlantis and Farscape and these others. And how Supergirl, we have the first transgender superhero on TV, played by a transgender actress, and how that would have been impossible earlier. But but we also see the pushback against that. So I think it's a constant.
Yeah.
It's like the thing I was talking about was progress is not something that is fixed. It's like once you achieve it, it doesn't mean you're never going back. It means you have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing on these issues to keep going forward, or people will come up and try to drag you back.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that we see things like Game of Thrones and then get popular, but then again we have Wheel of Time, we had the Willow show, we have all these other science fiction fantasy shows coming in with a completely different attitude to the female main characters, and the different attitude towards sexuality and gender that is more in line with what we are seeing in the novels and stories of the science fiction and fantasy community. So I think that's really encouraging. But again, it's not something you can just kind of rest on your laurels and say, "Oh, we did it." It's like it's a constant fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the story of the women's movement everywhere.
Yeah.
We've seen it with Roe versus Wade, right?
Oh yeah.
That's like the most recent and the most blatant rollback of women's reproductive rights, which is again tied to violence against women, because now there have been reports that domestic violence helplines are getting more and more calls saying, reproductive coercion is a factor in domestic violence now. So anyway, so back to this. So Jim, any thoughts on the last 10 years?
I think one of the other areas where things have been improving is, throughout the field, we're getting better at recognizing science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction are not just for the boys, and for a long time there was that sense, and it pervaded marketing and publishing and editing and the bookstores and how everything was sold and who was reading it. And it was never true. Regina, like you said, we started with Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein. We've had women reading science fiction for as long as it's been there. They've just been reading mostly about men going out and having manly adventures on manly planets. And, and not just men, but straight men, which means the women, if this is the audience that you're targeting and catering, well, women are there as the trophies, as the decorations, as anything but human beings. And I think there's finally more realization that women exist, women read stories, women buy a lot of books. And so we've gotten away from that, trying to market the stories, trying to target that straight teenage boy demographic. And that kind of ties into some of what Martha was saying too, because that also triggers a bit of pushback. When you've been the target audience, when you've been getting the whole or like 90% of the pie, and someone says, well, maybe we should share the pie evenly, you have some people who have that sort of knee-jerk, no, it's all mine.
Well, I think one of the other pieces of it is that when you've been catered to, and then you're suddenly reading a culture that is not yours, whether that's a culture because of a gender divide or you're reading, international fiction, there's shorthand that you don't recognize. And so, and that I think makes people feel excluded. And instead of seeing it as an opportunity to learn something new or to grow, people just like, no, I don't like it, and push back.
Yeah.
This makes me work.
I think it's really encouraging. One of the things that's really encouraging to me is I seem to hear from a lot of older guys, they're science fiction fans, that have said that, and fantasy fans, that the new books that are coming out are exciting to them in a way that the other stuff hasn't. They kind of drifted away because they were getting bored of the other stuff, and now reading the new books, they realize what they were missing, basically, that this is more exciting. You don't know, it's that lacking the shorthand, it's not boring.
Yeah.
When I was talking about pushback, and I hate to say it this way, but not all men. Yeah, they're good. I've talked to a lot of men also who they enjoy it. They like this. Thank God, something different, something with a different perspective, something that I haven't read 1,000 times already.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say, for someone like me who is not white, not male, and seeing more and more, for example, I think I mentioned this to Fonda Lee. I'm like, I write a little bit in my spare time. It's nice to exercise the creative muscles. And, if I look at someone like her and someone like Ken Liu, and you think, this is great. I actually read books or watch series or whatever, and I have there are people in there who look like me.
Yeah.
And who understand the shorthand stuff that, that comes with the culture. So representation, it's so trite, right? But it's true. Representation matters, and it matters for everyone along the gender spectrum. It matters so much for women and girls.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to ask a related question. Do you think the pandemic hastened such changes? Because it was in the last 10 years. So do you think it sped up some of the changes that y'all are talking about?
I'm going to say that it's too soon to know, and also probably not because of the number of writers who just stopped writing during the pandemic.
It wasn't just me.
Yeah.
It's not just you.
I think one good thing about it was that people got into different things. I saw so many people get into Chinese dramas and Korean dramas and everything, because there was a lot of them, and you really needed TV, a lot. And so then getting into these different series and stuff, and I think people spent a lot more time. A lot of people couldn't read because of the anxiety and everything. Other people couldn't do anything but read.
Yes.
So I think it's affected things in different ways, and it's going to be hard to kind of figure all that out.
Yeah, it did normalize pronouns.
Yeah.
Because we're used to seeing these just like, hello, look, here I am.
Yeah.
And so that I think is something that I've noticed.
Okay. Yeah. And the other question that I was curious about is, Mary Robinette, you brought up the fact that science fiction and fantasy is 10 years ahead of the curve. Is it the authors who are ahead of the curve, or do you think it's the readers, the changing social landscape, and the readers pushing it to be ahead of the curve?
Yes, I do. Yes, because authors are readers. So it is genre is a conversation. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's people having a conversation asynchronously, but I think that it is it is that liminal space that happens between the author and the reader. I think that's where the change is happening. And again, authors are readers.
Yeah.
Martha, what do you think?
I agree completely. Yeah. It's that's why I really think it's important for authors to try to, even though you get so busy and it can be so hard, to try to kind of stay up with what new things are coming out, and try to read new authors, people new to them authors, and then people who are just starting out, and try to just kind of see what's going on in the field, because I think it's so valuable for you as an author.
Keep up with the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jim mentioned not all men. We'll just
Sorry.
Just one question about men. So on a related note, do you think the sort of violent alpha male type character that is common in certain subgenres such as epic fantasy, grimdark fantasy, and some hard science fiction has started phasing out or morphing in speculative fiction in the past decade or so? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that just so stubborn that's just gonna stick around for much longer than expected? Mary Robinette.
So I'm so glad you asked this. So the fun thing about the alpha male is that it's based on this alpha wolf thing, which has been debunked by the man who came up with the term alpha wolf. Because what he said was he realized that he was doing all of his research on distressed captive populations, and that this is the way an unhealthy society behaves. So when you're talking about the alpha male, that is inherently based on an unhealthy society and not sustainable. So I hope it goes away. I think we're starting to see it, like, again, things creeping into mainstream through science fiction. One of the things that I love about the new Star Trek Strange New Worlds is that Captain Pike is not an alpha male. And it's so nice to see someone who's like, let me listen and take, and oh, maybe you would like to take the lead on this because you are better at it than I am. It's so I think it'll eventually burn itself out, but again, people are going to hang on to it because it serves them.
Yeah, as a feminist, it's a big thing for me to say that Captain Pike has tied with Captain Janeway as my favorite Star Trek captain.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did a really good job with that character. Oh, Martha, what do you think?
I agree completely, especially on we call Pike Captain Dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's that you see a lot more of. Oh, I think it was interesting what you said about the alpha male being, it's based on an unhealthy society. So many books you read where there's an alpha male, it's depicting an unhealthy society, whether the author knows that or not.
Yeah.
But I think also you start to see new kind of types come in that people are more excited about, like Farmer's Market Dad was one that came up before the pandemic, I think. And it's funny, the Star Trek references, Chris Pine is been labeled Farmer's Market Dad. And there's that great picture of him with the mask on coming back from the bookstore with like a grocery bag of books. But I think it's being replaced by these types that are actually really more attractive to people. It's like men who are caring and sensitive about things and talk about their emotions are more inherently interesting on TV and in movies. And so I think we've been gravitating more toward that because I think people, again, it's just like I've said a couple of times, I'm really done with the lone wolf hero. In reading about them, I'd rather read about people interacting in groups together, and for me, it's hard to write a character in isolation. I'm not really able to characterize them until I see them interacting with other characters or can write that. But so yeah, I think it's kind of going into the past.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking when you were saying that, I mean, don't we have to see characters interacting with each other in the environment before we figure out what the next move is going to be, what's going to happen, what are the consequences of a discussion or someone doing something to someone else? Isn't that like basic in storytelling?
Yeah, you'd think, yeah.
Yeah. Jim, what do you think?
I think the alpha male character is probably going to stick around for a while at least. I think, we've broadened the possibilities for those male heroic characters. They don't all have to be that alpha male stereotype, but there is still an audience for that. There's still the audience where that's the fantasy, is the guy who is tough and strong and always in charge and always, that super action hero, super competent Batman, everybody else follow my lead sort of thing.
Yeah.
But even there, I think we're seeing it evolve. We're seeing comics that humanize Batman more and show him as flawed and start to question and deconstruct that sort of ultimate alpha male fantasy that's been built up.
So Jim, as a man, how does one write a strong male character believably? I mean, is there, like, what does it mean to be a male writer? Can you does your maleness inform your writing?
It does. And it's, as a cisgender male author, I do sit down every time I start to write and take inspiration directly from my penis, as male authors have done since the beginning of literature. It's part of the process.
It's really beautiful the way you can be so vulnerable about your maleness. And that's really touching. Not everyone could be that strong. And I think we should all recognize
that. On a serious note, Jim does write some of the most hilarious female characters, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My dad loves your books. I mean, I do too. But to be clear, my dad eats your books.
Thank you
in
for
audiobook, and he likes it, not in any kind of gross way, but
I get the royalties either way, so have fun, go to town.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the past 10 years. So let's look forward now. Let's look at how we're going to move forward now. So, one of the ways in which speculative fiction authors can help with changing patriarchal culture, the very culture that normalizes violence against women now and in the years to come, is to, as horror master Joe Hill put it during our first ever Read for Pixels live stream session a decade ago, tell the right stories. I'm just directly quoting him. He said, tell the right stories. And when he said that, his entire audience for that live stream, and I remember that because I was hosting that, everyone just paused. They literally started to think about, tell the right stories. So let's get down to the nuts and bolts of storytelling for speculative fiction authors who would like to include violence against women as a theme in their stories. So first question is, what are the pitfalls that speculative fiction writers who have never included violence against women in their stories before need to bear in mind? Mary Robinette.
One of the things that I think is that people, it's very tempting to just reach directly for the pain and have someone living only in the trauma. But people are, first, more nuanced than that. And second, it's not realistic in terms of how someone progresses through. So one thing that I think people should do if they are intending to do this is to become to educate themselves in trauma, different kinds of trauma responses, so that you've got a character who is displaying something that is more realistic, more naturalistic, but also I think that it is, the way I tend to approach it is less about this is the pain and more about this is my skill set that I have developed because of this. So like I am hyper conscious in certain situations, and that's a skill set that as a woman I have had to develop to avoid. I used to work at a theater company and had been warned the day I was hired to never be alone in the room with the artistic director. And so I developed the skill set of always keeping a table between us. And that's the kind of thing, like that's that for me is much more interesting than just the fear response, because the fear response by itself removes agency from the woman.
Okay.
It's not that it doesn't exist. It's just, it can't be in isolation.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's basically it, is you have to, if you don't have that experience in your own life, you have to research it. and I spend a lot of time looking at trauma and responses to it, and I think that's what you have to do. I think learning about PTSD is a really important thing to do. My father was a World War II veteran. He was in a Nazi prison camp, and he had injuries that lasted for years that affected him, long after the war, when I was still a kid, basically long after the war was over. And growing up with that gave me kind of a window on PTSD that I don't think, it's kind of, it's hard to describe. It's like, I wish I hadn't had it, but it gives you kind of a lot of understanding of that kind of behavior. And it also affects you. PTSD can be passed along to your family members too. So I think you have to be very cautious when you're writing things like that and you don't have any experience with it. Just even listening to people talk, reading about people talking about their own experiences, watching, documentaries or whatever, I think is helpful. But yeah, it can be very, very tricky. And basically what Mary Robinette said.
Yeah, and Bishop, who's also one of our Read for Pixels authors, and she's so popular. And her books usually have protagonists who are. She doesn't show the violence. She shows what happens after the violence and how they are recovering from the trauma that had been inflicted on them. And when we asked her about it, she actually said, I read and read and read. I read all the books about PTSD. I read all the books about all this sort of violence, gender-based violence. And I read and I sat and I thought and I wrote and I read what I wrote and I did more reference. It's a lot of work, but it paid off. Her books, I mean, speaking as someone who's run an anti-violence against women nonprofit for almost 15 years now, she's spot on. And that she got from reading, that she didn't get from knowing someone who is a survivor, she got all of that from reading. So just a message to everyone out there, you can do it if you read a lot, and by a lot we mean a lot. So anyway, on to Jim. Jim, what do you think? Because you were a sexual assault counselor as well, right?
For a little while, yeah.
Yeah.
Did some male outreach work. And kind of what Mary Robinette and Martha were both saying is, yes, research. We as speculative fiction authors will spend half a day digging into the proper way to forge this little dagger for this one scene. But then it comes to writing about rape, writing about domestic violence, and we just, there's that assumption that, oh, I know this, and you don't. You need to read. You need to listen to people about their experiences. Especially violence against women, you need to understand power and control dynamics and how this fits into a larger societal structure. One example I was thinking of is if you've ever been listening about a domestic violence situation and said, well, why doesn't she just leave? You're not ready.
Yeah.
You need to do more research. You need to understand, because whatever your judgments or anything, the fact is, it is very difficult. Women and male victims of domestic violence that tend not to leave. When they do leave, they tend to go back. You need to understand why this happens. You need to do the reading. You need to do the research. And I think especially for other men who are trying to write this stuff, we need to listen. We need to listen not just to the big stories of how domestic violence works, of how rape and trauma and recovery work, but like Mary Robinette was touching on, talk to the women in your life about, or listen to them about all of the day-to-day precautions, all of the steps that they're taking to protect themselves that most guys, in my experience, have never even considered. You know, whether it's checking the back seat of your car every time you go out, whether it's knowing where the exits are, whether it's knowing to keep the table between you and that guy. There are just so many little things that if you want to write about this dynamic, if you want to write about violence against women, you've got to get that bigger picture.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Steven Erickson actually, when he did his session with us a few years ago, he used it as an opportunity to educate his readers who did not like a female character because she has PTSD from sexual assault. And for years, his readers have been dumping on that character. And he took the opportunity to ask them to think. He said, how would you act if you had been brutally sexually assaulted and not just physically hurt, but in all ways? And after that, in his Facebook group, everyone started talking about that. And people suddenly realized that you can't just, in a step of a finger, just recover from sexual assault. And you're allowed to you're allowed to not be perfect when you're recovering from violence, from the trauma of violence. So yeah, there's a lot of questions that people should ask themselves. Why do I not like this character? Who's a victim of trauma, who's survived trauma. So we've been talking about this. So before we move on to talking about generally about the community, what techniques would you recommend, all of you recommend, to authors to turn toxic tropes that are rife with sexism, misogyny, and/or violence against women on their heads, and even use them to send a message to the reader that violence against women is not acceptable? Martha?
Techniques for learning about that, I guess, would just be, there's some really good documentaries you can watch to kind of learn how that works. And I think you also have to kind of just learn to recognize it in your own writing and what you're doing. And it's very difficult because this stuff can get so ingrained in, especially people my age. It's just baked into your consciousness, and you really have to learn to look for it, and just kind of gear your reading and your viewing towards things that will help you kind of do that. Other authors, do a really good job of it, on shows that do a good job of showing, like, portraying male characters that really model non-toxic masculinity and that kind of thing.
How do you notice when you stumble into one of your blind spots, Martha? That's the thing that a lot of authors, I think, would probably want to know. How do you know that you stumble into one of your blind spots?
Well, I think from reading authors that don't have those blind spots, and you realize that you've been making assumptions about things based on your, these prejudices and whatever in your. I'm sorry, everything's shaking. I've got a cat on my table that's.
Wait, you've mentioned cat and not shown us cat? There are laws.
Well, it was. You were going to get tail right in the middle of someone saying something very serious in my. You just kind of have to. Doing a lot of reading and just kind of realizing that, and also like just listening to other authors talk about it is, I think, been one of the most helpful things for me. That's why I kind of miss Twitter, as there were so many good even with all the crap going on, there was so many good conversations about racism and homophobia and just sexism and everything else, that those are really helpful. And you can sit there and kind of, look at yourself and be able to do this. It's going to take a long time, but it just listening to people talk about it, I think, is really helpful.
Okay, we're going to pause for a bit because the mention of the cat has set off a flurry of people doing this. Cat. You want to see the cat. Cat tax. Stealth kitty.
I can't. The cat's on the floor now, and I can't pick them up right now because of I just had surgery. So
yeah.
Okay.
All right.
If we're lucky, the cat will come back.
We'll all encourage the cat to.
Yeah.
But yes, you have a medical exemption from cat.
I have a medical exemption.
Yeah. Okay, and cat says and then understandable.
Yeah.
Okay, so we mentioned blind spots just now with chatting with Martha.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Because this is actually a really good example. For me, one of my knowledge gaps was the word blind spot, and because it's ableist language, that I was like, I had no awareness of it because I had grown up using it, and so now I use like knowledge gap or lacuna of awareness, and it's that kind of thing that you need someone from within a community often to point out to you. So when I'm thinking about these tropes that we're talking about, one of the things that I will do is two mechanical things is that I'll check TV tropes, which is this database of tropes, and I kind of look and then I think about examples of other people doing this particular trope. And trope in itself is not a bad thing. It's just a building block. But I'll think of examples of other people doing that. And if all of the examples that I'm coming up with are basically treading exactly the same territory that I'm treading, it's like, am I doing anything new? And what is the larger conversation that this is part of? And then as part of that, I also have a conversation with people who are in community. One of the things that I've learned is that I try to begin those conversations before I start writing, so that if I'm working with a sensitivity reader or an expert knowledge person, that I am not accidentally baking something harmful into the plot structure of my novel, because what I found was that if I wait and bring them in later, they're having to do a lot of cleanup. Whereas if we can have that conversation at the beginning, I'm likely to just pick better ingredients for my recipe than if I wait to the end and they're like, you put poop in this. And at that point you can't, there's just poop in there. And you basically.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on knowledge gaps, Jim?
I think we've all got some. I think it's an active process trying to find them and fill them in. I think the advice Mary Robinette and Martha were sharing is good. Another piece for me is listening to readers, listening to things that come up in reviews. And it's hard because at that point the book's done. I can't fix it. But I can learn and do better in the next one. And there are things, when I was writing the Princess series, there were characters that evolved and changed based on reader feedback. With the janitors of the post-apocalypse, same sort of thing. There were things that I started doing in the first book that, you get feedback, you read the responses, and you realize, oh, I messed up. And it's also hard because you've got to be able to separate out, does this reviewer have a point? Sometimes reviewers are wrong, but you also can't let the ego get in the way and let it be, oh, how dare you criticize? Don't you know what I meant? I meant well, and I'm on your side. And, I get so exasperated with the flouncing of, you have just lost an ally to your cause because you criticize. Well, just shut up. Go away quietly, please. But yeah, listening to that feedback and learning from it, in addition to, reaching out, reading other perspectives, TV tropes. I spend a lot of time on there. Yeah. And sometimes it's making sure I'm not perpetuating, and sometimes it's looking for a trope to play with. That is where some of my ideas come from.
Yeah.
Let's poke this and see what happens.
Oh, thank you, Mary Robinette, for helping me replace the term blind spot with knowledge gap.
Yeah, I'm passing along things that I've learned from other people who pointed out that and was like, oh, that's an easy one. There's so many things in the language. Language is hard.
Yeah. Okay, so time's marching on, so let's talk about what the community can do. So what are your tips? Let's talk about tips and recommendations, because we've already actually started that, when Mary Robinette, said, no, not blind spot, knowledge gap. So do you think, what are your recommendations for the speculative fiction community? And by community, I mean writers, readers, editors, publishers, with regards to tackling sexism, misogyny, and violence against women. Do you think there have been any changes or in the attitudes of people in the community over the past decade with regards to these issues? Martha?
Well, yeah, I think people are a lot more sensitive to them, and they're not willing to put up with them, in the way that, we kind of had to when we were especially when I was growing up in the 70s, and you're kind of, it was hard to find, especially children's books, what would be young adult books now, that had like female characters at all. So yeah, I think it's changed a lot. I think you'll get people have so many more options now for science fiction and fantasy. You don't have to read stuff that has these toxic depictions that you don't like. I don't think I've read a book with violence, that had that kind of violence against women in years, basically, because I haven't, all the things I like to read are authors who don't do that.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the young adult books, some people have been saying that, the young adult community overcorrects itself. But I don't think so. I mean, yes, they do have takedown culture, but a lot of it is, it's in a way, like they say, overcorrection. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not as versed in the young adult community, so I don't.
Oh, no, I mean Martha, because she had a YASA prize for.
Yeah, but that's for writing an adult book that young adults like. But yeah, I'm not as well versed in it either. I just think there's so much young adult fiction of every genre that you have so many more options. I mean, I was stuck with Heinlein juveniles, and back then Andre Norton, who probably a lot of things she's did would probably be looked on as sexist now, but at the time it was just women getting to have agency and going on, have adventures and not just being, the prize or, the load or the babysitter or whatever. So I think that there's, we can all point to cases where, yeah, it does seem like an overcorrection and people are doing, there was a great article recently on performative allyship and performative posturing, where people who don't do anything to promote liberal, progressive causes or anything, except jump on people they think aren't being exactly correct or progressive enough, which is going to be a thing. It's always been people always take opportunities to attack each other, so it's always going to be a thing. But I think that speaking about it and complaining about it when you see somebody doing it, pushing back, is kind of essential part of the process. It's also, but we also have to like not engage in mob tactics to do it. But that's just kind of a human thing that it's, I think it's always going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, I've seen actions taken against big, major transgressions. When people toss around the term cancel culture, I cringe a little bit, because I don't know, all of these people who were quote unquote canceled, they all still seem to be on an awful lot of platforms talking about how they were canceled.
Yeah.
They've still got careers, they're still out there.
Yeah.
But, I have seen, my own agent dropped an author a few years back after some very problematic behavior came out. I've seen publishers do it occasionally. What I think we also need to work on is the smaller stuff. Things that, the term that gets used a lot is microaggressions, and I worry that minimizes it, that people hear that and say, oh, it's little, it doesn't matter. And I think of it more like a paper cut. One paper cut is not going to kill you. It still hurts. Now imagine you're getting 5 paper cuts a day. Now imagine that every time you go into this meeting or every time you go to this workplace, you're going to get some paper cuts. It very quickly goes from, oh, it's just a little thing, to you're dreading it. Mm-hmm. And so speaking up when we see that smaller stuff going on, and sort of, all you need to do, especially, again, speaking to my men, I just pull him aside and said, dude, not cool. That sometimes that's all it takes. And I think that's one area we need to keep working.
Yeah. Mary Robinette, do you have any thoughts on this?
Very similar to what everyone else is saying. I think the one thing that I would add is that it takes a lot of emotional energy to change someone's mind. And not everybody has the safety or energy to be able to speak up and say something. So sometimes I will see people getting mad because no one is, because, well, this author hasn't said anything. I noticed their silence. I'm like, well, maybe they're tired. maybe it's maybe you're hitting a trigger for them. Like, you don't know what's happening in their life. But I think that if you do have the energy and safety to say something, that going in and it is, you can do a powerful service, but you also have to decide who your audience is. Is the audience that you're speaking to the people who are watching you, which is the more performative thing, or are you actually trying to change the person's mind? In which case, like, those are two different conversations. Because I will sometimes have someone, I'm like, this person is not someone whose mind can be changed, but people need to know that it's not acceptable who are around them. So I'm speaking to them about this person.
Yeah.
Which is different than, hello, you. Hey, dude, not cool. That's they're two different things, and everybody and every situation is going to be different, and you have to evaluate it based on yourself and the situation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of that, some of the people we call gatekeepers to speculative fiction are the publishers and editors. So what would your recommendations, do you have any tips and recommendations and suggestions for publishers and editors who want to join efforts to address sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in the speculative fiction space? Martha?
I think just a lot of them have already, in some ways, at least the publishers you see, like Tor.com has a lot of fiction with queer characters. That kind of that you didn't see, 10 years ago. So I think that they're learning just the way the authors are and the members of the community are. And I think the fact that just books by diverse voices, books by queer authors and books by women are getting a lot more popular now. I think that kind of helps the whole process. It's a lot easier, I think, for an editor to justify buying a book like that now to an upper level management person that might not be as accepting of it, because they can point to all the examples of books that have been very popular that have queer characters or non-white authors, like we're talking about Fonda Lee and R.F. Kuang and all the others that have gotten won awards and been had huge books. Cats. So I think that they're learning just like we are, and the pushes we're seeing, like with the strike against HarperCollins for more diversity in the workplace, was one of the things they were striking for. I think things like that help. And again, it's just like you just kind of always have to keep pushing on issues like that.
Mm-hmm. Jim?
I think, taking time to consciously look at the voices you're promoting, the voices you're amplifying. It's similar to what I recommend doing as a reader, what I had to do as a reader, because I might think I'm very open-minded, I'm not discriminating in my reading, but then consciously and deliberately looking at my bookshelf and realizing how many of these authors are white and how few authors were non-white, how many authors are male versus how many are female. And I never consciously sat down to say, okay, I'm going to prioritize this particular group of authors. But, we exist in this larger society. We take in all these messages, we take in all this marketing, all this promotion. You've got to consciously step back and look at that. And I think it's the same thing for publishers and editors, is look at your stable of authors. Who are you promoting? Who are you pushing and amplifying? Who are you leaving out? And it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing check of your assumptions and your defaults and your knowledge gaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mary Robinette, do you have any comments?
One of the things, it's a constantly shifting landscape. So the advice that I could give about any particular agents, editors, would immediately be wrong, or at least outdated. So for me, the thing is what Jim and Martha have already said, but adding to that, doing your due diligence and just checking with SIFWA's Writer Beware, just in case there are any red flags that are out there about someone that you're considering submitting to.
Yeah, I'm just gonna share something connected to what Jim was saying about being really conscious about all this as an editor and a publisher. So when the Pixel Project put together our charity anthology, we only had 16 slots. And Guy Gabriel Kay introduced us to Rebecca Brewer, who became the editor for the anthology. And one of the reasons why it took so long to put the anthology together is because Rebecca and I had a lot of conversation about we want to be inclusive, but 16 slots is not enough. So how are we gonna, we have so many authors, right? By that time we worked with, 200 plus authors, Read for Pixels authors. How do we choose someone? How what would work? And we ended up not just choosing from alumni, but also looking at all the other authors that we had been thinking of working with, that we knew we had to make an effort to include their voices, not just for them, but also for the groups, the marginalized groups that they represent. And here's an interesting thing. I got asked publicly by a white male author why we didn't include him. And that was fun to answer. But, he's very kind. He's very kind.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't you. Jim, okay, everyone, for the record, Jim would never ask that question. Jim would actually know what we're trying to do. Because Jim has worked with us for how long now, Jim? On and on?
Close to 10 years.
Yeah. So Jim would know, but this author asked out the kindness of his heart because he wants to help, right? So that was my lesson that was a learning experience with explaining why we made the choices that we made. And I'm still sorry that because they're just 16 slots, we couldn't include everybody. And we still got pushback. We still had one reviewer say, why did you include men?
Yep, they would not say that for an all-male TOC.
Yeah.
Although I am glad that now people get mad about that. But for decades, people didn't even notice it.
The reviewer was from Feminist Book Club, so we did expect something like that. And they were all about pushing books by women, and so but we're pretty proud of having both men and women and also non-binary authors on the TOC. But it took such a long time and it took a lot of conversation. So I started wondering if this sort of effort is why some editors and publishers aren't so much into it, because you really need to make a big effort. But I think they really should make a big effort. It's important to grow with the times. So before we end, before I put in my last question, there are a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm going to put them on screen now. Where is it? Where is it? Okay, so put the first one on screen. From Alana K. Science fiction and fantasy explores possibilities, often using thought experiments to explore gender, like the reverse patriarchy. Do you have your own thought experiments you explore in your work? Let's start with Martha.
Yeah, sometimes. One thing I've been doing lately is the idea that fantasy worlds have to be basically worse than our own. So I've been working on doing fantasy cities and so forth that have free medical care and mass transportation, and kind of looking at fantasy ways to work those kind of things in. Because it's just as a way to kind of get out of that mindset.
Okay. Cat.
What's that tail?
Cat's tail.
Hello.
Hey everybody, it's the cat. Which
Can
cat?
you make the question go away so we can see?
Yeah. Hang on.
No offense,
here
Alana
we
K.
go.
You understand?
Okay, cat.
This is Jack. That's been acrobatically around my desk for the whole time.
Hi, Jack. Jack's like, I had an agenda this evening that you're interrupting.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, Jack is going. Oops. Okay, I'm gonna put the question back on screen. Okay, so who wants to go next with answering this question?
Mine is actually similar to Martha's. That one of the things that I've been experimenting with my Lady Astronaut series in particular is what happens if someone makes the kinder choice? Like, can you have someone making a kinder choice and still have tension in the novel? And I'm learning the answer is yes, but it's it's fun.
Do, do your characters ever, while you're writing Mary Robinette, do you find yourself facing a situation where your character makes a kind of choice, but it has all sorts of repercussions that aren't so kind?
Oh yeah, I mean that's the law of unintended consequences. One of my favorite things to do to my characters is the thing where the solution is the next problem.
Isn't that real life?
Yeah. Yeah. That may be why it works so well.
So
it's like, Jim, I wish I could sell a novel. Oh no, I sold a novel. I have to finish writing it.
What about you, Jim? What do you think of, what's your answer to this question?
I mean, there are definitely thought experiments. I mean, a lot of speculative fiction, especially, and fiction in general, comes down to what if. I'm trying to think of any particular ones from recent books, and I'm feeling a little sheepish because I'm not coming up with anything that I was consciously trying to play with in terms of thought experiments.
Yeah.
It was more the big questions like, what if the aliens came, but it was after the zombie apocalypse? And then what if we ate the aliens? And yeah, they're not so much the intellectual thought experiments. But
your characters tend to be non-traditional in that, janitors being the heroes, for example. So where do you get those ideas from?
That might fall a bit more into the question. One of the things I like to do is, what if we tell this story from the perspective of somebody who is traditionally not the hero?
Yeah.
Goblins, janitors, librarians, that sort of thing.
Librarians are heroes. I stand by that to the day I die.
I've got 4 books to back you up on that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the second question, and then after that, we'll go to the final question. Okay, so the second question is from Misty306. Hi, Misty. Misty is one of our longtime viewers, and Misty says there has been some pushback in society from males wanting to return females to their places. Why do you believe entertainment, including writing, has been able to continue being progressive? Martha?
I think because it's better. It's not boring. It's like people are tired of the same old thing. White people are tired of white people, even. So I think the innovation and sorry, it's getting late and I'm starting to get rambly. But just it's when the stories are better and more exciting, I think it draws people in, even if people think they're not going to like that, if they at least try it. I think that so many people, and I actually think the people who are pushing back are really in the minority, but it's just that they're so vocal. It's like they seem like there's a lot of them, where we're not really hearing from the main part of the audience, which is people who are out buying all these books and reading them and everything. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it does. Any thoughts, anyone else?
So I write historical stuff a lot, and the idea of returning women to their places is propaganda that is very, very modern in its construction. the return to normalcy was part of the in the United States, was part of the political bill of sale that the politicians were putting out after World War II, because it's like, oh, these women are taking men's jobs, and but when you actually start looking through history, there are lots of examples of women and societies where the place is not barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. And so I think that the reason that entertainment, including writing, has been able to continue being progressive is because the half of the audience doesn't want to be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. I mean, some of them may, but there's, you can be progressive when you've got an audience who's like, yes, thank you. This is the way I want to live and how I want to be.
Mm-hmm. And Jim?
And I think, like Martha was saying, there are a lot of people who are not threatened by it, who are secure enough that they are able to exist in a world where there are some stories that are not about them or not for them. You do have that group of loud voices, and you have, I think, sort of a small industry that makes its money by preaching to those angry, insecure voices, sort of performative misogyny almost. And unfortunately, some people buy into that. But I think much more common is the reaction of either, hey, this is really cool, or, okay, this isn't for me, but there's still 6 other things out here this week that are for me.
Mm-hmm.
I will read one of those. I can let somebody else like this stuff. It's not, I don't have to freak out about it.
No, there's only one true fiction.
So, okay, it's getting late, so we're going to wrap up soon. So final question. Y'all have been talking about, you read a lot. As authors, you're also readers. So what speculative fiction books would you recommend for authors and readers to check out as examples of violence against women being handled really well? Martha?
I have trouble with that because I don't read books with violence against women. I've really realized. Well, I can't really think of any. I know I've read a lot of books that did do it well, but probably not within the past 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to chime in with book recommendations?
I have 2. One I keep talking about, the Monsters We Defy by Leslie Penelope.
Mm-hmm.
The violence against women is not a rape scenario, but it's still dealing with the PTSD of being, a woman in a patriarchal society, and it's beautifully handled, I think. And then the other one, I would argue is speculative fiction. It's billed as mainstream, but it's Lessons in Chemistry.
Lessons in Chemistry.
It's an alternate history in which a woman who's a chemist becomes, in the 1950s, becomes a huge TV show star for a cooking series that is secretly teaching women about chemistry, and it winds up having ramifications, and the project that she's working on is not a project that actually existed, which is why I'm like, this is totally science fiction. But it's fantastic and really sensitively handled.
Who's the author?
I cannot remember.
Okay, Lessons in Chemistry.
Yeah.
All right. Jim?
Yeah, I had 2 ideas. One, Actually, Mary Robinette's Lady Astronaut series, I was not so much directly violence against women, but I was very impressed at the different layers of, of oppression, of societal hierarchies, and she just did a really nice job of showing how they intersect, how someone can be oppressed in this respect, but also oppressing on this other axis. And it was thoughtful and it was really well done. And so,
Thanks.
shout out for that. And the other one was Catherine Valente wrote a book called The Refrigerator Monologues.
Oh, yeah.
And it was basically a direct conversational response about all of the women in different comics who have been killed off or abused or victims of violence, generally to further the man's story. And it's pretty head on about how it addresses things.
Mary Robinette actually typed in the answer to who's the author for Lessons in Chemistry. You can put it on screen. Everyone is by Bonnie Garmus, I think. So everyone go check out Lessons in Chemistry. And I'm just going to recommend to everyone 2 series. One is Soulwood, the Soulwood series by Faith Hunter. And the protagonist is recovering from being in a cult that forces their teenage girls to get married. There's plenty of sexual assault and domestic violence. And the series is a paranormal procedural series, but it's also a lot about how she recovers from the violence. And also the Courtyard of the Other series by Anne Bishop. That's also the female protagonist is very unusual. And just trigger warning for cutting, but it's also a lot about recovering from all the trauma the particular type of human that she is in that world. All the girls who are like that have been subjected to, and it's really, really horrible. So just very quickly, we got to wrap up now. We have a fundraiser going on right now. Everyone, we are trying to raise $10,000 for our 10th anniversary to keep our anti-violence against women campaigns and programs and initiatives running for another 15 years, because we're going to be 15 years old in January 2024. So you know what? It's a little bit depressing to have to say we want to keep on running for another 15 years, but this problem is not going to go away suddenly. So we're going to always have to be there. So I'm just going to share the slide to tell everyone where to go get. Where is it? Slides. It is not sharing, which is really weird. Slides. All right, everyone, I'm going to have to re-upload stuff, but let's see. Okay, so I'll just talk about this right now. Anusha will put screen share. Okay, Anusha was put something's wrong today with the text. So everyone, Anusha, who is today's producer, will put the link in the chat box for everyone to click to go straight to the fundraiser. So Jim and Martha's goodies have already gone. Jim had donated a set of Genesis of the Post-Apocalypse together with a nifty bookmark that had already gone to a really generous donor. Martha had donated a whole bunch of books, first editions, signed and personalized for the donors. Those have gone as well. And Mary Robinette had donated 2 bundles. One, the Tuckerization bundle with a hand-knit cowl for Mary Robinette, that has gone. But let me tell you about the second goodie bundle, which is still there. So it's called the Coaching and Cocktail bundle. And Mary Robinette is offering it to one very generous Read for Pixels donor who is looking for some help with their work in progress, and who also loves cocktails or mocktails. Because as for those of you who weren't here at the beginning of the session, Mary Robinette had said that if you don't drink or like alcohol, she can make a recipe that has no alcohol in it, but something that's your jam. And yeah, so I'm gonna see, everyone please be patient. I'm gonna see if I can put a slide up for what we need to tell everyone, because this is also time sensitive. Here we go. And as usual, Windows is very slow. Okay, right. Open with. Okay. Let's see if this works. Present. Share screen. Yes, this works. Yes. Okay. Right, everyone. So here's where you can go get the Mary Robinette's remaining bundle, and we have also still have a bunch of goodies there as well. We have some new goodies coming in next Thursday. And you can go to tinyurl.com/R4P Rally Up 2023, and this is case sensitive. And you can find out more about the Read for Pixels campaign. You can go to bit.ly/Read for Pixels. That's case sensitive as well. And some of you might have been here just now when I talked about how we put together the charity anthology. And it's basically the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Woman. It is called Giving the Devil His Due, and it's available until October 31st of this year. And you can get the paperback and ebook from Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and all other major booksellers worldwide. You can learn more about the anthology in bit.ly/Giving the Devil His Due. Again, it's case sensitive. And the audiobook, which is Audio Award nominated, is Audio Award nominated. It's available now from Audible, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Kobo, Chirp, and all major audiobook retailers worldwide. You can learn more about the audiobook and the audiobook readers who have all donated their time and talent to this at tinyurl.com/GTDHD audiobook R4P. So I'm gonna stop sharing this. And very quickly, does anyone have any announcements for anything new that's coming up in the next 3 to 6 months? I think, Martha, you have one, right? You have an announcement.
Yeah, I have the revised Author's Preferred Edition of City of Bones. It's my second novel that came out in 1995, is being reissued by Tor.com. It'll be out like this Tuesday, September 5th. And then the next Murderbot novel, System Collapse, is coming out November 14th.
Okay.
And I have Witch King is out now, my new fancy novel.
Yeah, Witch King. Everyone go read it. It's action-packed. It's really action-packed. So if you like action-packed fantasy, go and watch. Go and read that. Anyone else have any announcements?
I've got one coming out December 12th. It's a middle grade fantasy called Amelia Sand and the Silver Queens. The pre-order links are up at least a few of the sites have them. I don't think everywhere has them yet, but some of them are up.
So it's up on Amazon now?
It should be on Amazon, yes.
Okay. Right. So Mary Robinette, anything?
I don't have any new books out. My novel, The Spare Man, came out last October, almost a year ago now. And if you are someone who is interested in writing, I have a Patreon and I teach classes. You can visit my website, which is my entire name here, .com. And I have a class. I teach a monthly class to my Patreon, and then I have some asynchronous standalone classes like barriers to writing and diagnosing story problems that are available asynchronously through my website.
Okay. And to wrap it up, there are some comments from the audience that I think y'all should see. I just checked my local library for the Garmus book. All checked out and holds are in 3 figures. That's a lot of people wanting to read that book.
Yeah.
Misty 306 is a librarian, and she will be ordering Witch King for her library. So that's going to be very cool. Okay, so everyone, thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, Mary Robinette. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Jim, for coming in 10 years after we started to help us have a look back at what's been happening in the last 10 years, and also to look forward and what everyone can do for hopefully more than the next 10 years. So everyone, we all bid you good night or good morning wherever you are in the world. I think some of you are on my side of the world, and it's like Sunday morning over here, and it's Saturday evening. It's Saturday evening. I'm in the future. Hi guys. Hi y'all. Hi guys. Hi y'all. Okay, so everyone have a really good weekend.
Thanks, Regina.
Thank you.